Welcome back to the Sectigo Security First Identity Summit. I'm Tim Callan, Chief Compliance Officer at Sectigo, and I'm joined here with Jason Sirocco, CTO of PKI at Sectigo. Hi, Jay.
Hey Tim, how's it doing?
Good. And here we're talking about the 4 pillars of certificate lifecycle management, or CLM. So this is the basic idea here is that we are going to walk through what the main functional capability is, what a CLM really is and does, and how it benefits you. But before we get there, let's lay a little bit of groundwork. We'll talk about why CLM matters. I'll introduce you to the concept of certificate agility, and we'll get into these foundational aspects of what CLM needs to be. So first of all, before we get started, or before we do anything more, actually before we get started, make sure that you talk to us. So we do have the Speak With Us button, which is here in the interface. While Jason and I are busy talking, we have one of our associates who will be fielding your texts. You can chat your questions or comments, and somebody will get back to you. And we can do that throughout the presentation today. So the first thing just to think about is certificate. We are in a world of decreasing certificate lifespans, and let's say rapidly decreasing certificate lifespans. Once upon a time, within our lifespans, within our lifetimes, you could easily buy a 6-year SSL certificate, public SSL certificate, and put it on a server. People used to do this, buy these and say, I'm going to deprecate that box before I need to change the certificate again. Those are now down to 1 year in duration, and they're probably going to get shorter. And we recently saw SMIME certificates capped, right? And they now have a maximum term of 3 years, and I'm sure we're going to watch that get lower over time. And we see shorter certificate lifespans coming in all kinds of other aspects of our lives as well. They're getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And there are good reasons for that, right, Jay?
Tim, there's a lot of good reasons for it, and that's regardless of the private trust sense or the public trust sense, which is what you've been referring to.
Yeah.
In all cases, what it has to do with is, well, we know we have revocation. The problem, though, is that we might also have discovered problems with certificate issuance. We might be dealing with certificates that have been compromised somehow. And so therefore, there's a lot of really good reasons to be able to keep those certificate lifespans shorter. I think, Tim, some of the most dramatic shortening of certificate lifecycle lifespans has to do with private trust. And one of my very favorite examples, of course, is in DevOps. We're now looking at certificates being issued by certificate authorities underneath Kubernetes clusters out to containers that are lasting in the span of hours. We're not talking about days, months, years. We're talking about hours, Tim. It's very dramatic.
Yeah, and there was on the previous slide, there was a stat, more than 90% of our public TLS certificates are 90 days or shorter in duration. And so think about that, right? That's public certs. And like you said, in a private scenario, they could get considerably shorter than that. So as my certificate lifespans get shorter, part of what that means is they need to be replaced much more, right? So if I used to issue 3-year certs, now I issue 1-year certs, I've got 3 times the replacement burden, all else being equal. And all else isn't equal. They're also proliferating. The number and type that we're using is going up all the time. But in addition to that, we've seen there's more need for sudden responsiveness than ever before. And rapid certificate replacement is becoming more and more common, where for one reason or another, the certificates we have can't be used as is anymore. And I'll give you some examples of this. Exposed private keys is a big one. If the private keys are exposed, not in your control, potentially known to any party that shouldn't have them, you just can't use the certificate, because at that point they have it. They can unlock your cryptography, right? And that's real simple. And so that applies to your private PKI. It also applies to your public PKI. In the event of public certs, if the CA becomes aware of the private key is exposed, the CA must revoke that certificate immediately. It's just that simple. And discontinue use of any other cert with that private key. Not just that cert, but any other cert with the same private key. They all get revoked. And sometimes these can be big revocation events. If somebody leaks a bunch of private keys, CAs might be going through and wiping out thousands or tens of thousands of certs all at the same instant. And this has happened in the past. There's also certificate misissuance. And sometimes these are weird, subtle things that go on. So let's talk about the 63-bit serial number entropy example. This is a great example. This is from about 2 years ago. And basically what happened was there was a very common, there's a concept we call entropy. And in public certificates, entropy is basically, and entropy in computer science, entropy is is a set of digits that are essentially unpredictable, right? You look at them and you can't really say, I can predict that this is a 1 or a 0. You don't know what it is. And so there was a requirement for public SSL certificates in the CA browser forum requirements that the serial number of the certificate have 64 bits of entropy. So you can't predict a serial number for a certificate. And that helps you with certain collision attacks. And so there was a popular tool that people had been using for years and years to generate their entropy, and they would get their serial numbers and they'd get these 64-bit serial numbers and they'd drop them in. And a couple years ago, the community came to the realization that all of the serial numbers that came out of this tool either always started with a 0 or always started with a 1. I can't remember which is which, but it was one or the other. I think it was always a 0. And at that point, you no longer have a digit of entropy, right? So your first digit in your 64-bit number, if you always know that it starts with a 0, you can ignore that. So you don't have 64 bits of entropy, you have 63 bits of entropy. Guess what that means? That means that you have a non-compliant certificate according to the rules. And it wasn't just one non-compliant certificate, it was millions. And so in, I'm going to say 2019, maybe 2019, CAs found themselves revoking millions of certificates for this reason, because of this tool that was used by lots and lots of people. And these things happen.
Tim, it wasn't really, you mentioned it as a rule, and it's a good rule. Some people though might think that, oh geez, what's the difference between 63 or 64? I'm not even sure.
It's just a bit, really right? Means. It's just one.
What's just one? When in reality, once you get up to that high of a bit length, you're dealing with every single bit is adding, let's just call it, enormous amounts of information. In other words, by having one less bit of entropy, the ease of an attack, the ease of a collision attack by the bad guys is immensely easier.
Well, every bit is doubling the size of the number space, right? So that's, the difference between 63 bits and 64 bits is half the number space, right? That's what it is. So yeah, you're right. It's not like saying, well, it's 1/64th less. No, it's 50% less. And therefore, yes, it definitely really matters. 0 days. Heartbleed is the perfect example, right? In the case of Heartbleed in 2014, there was a flaw was discovered whereby you could reach out to a server and actually obtain the public key for a certificate that was on it. And you wouldn't even be able to go back to your servers and your logs and know who had done this and who had not. And as a consequence, every cert that had ever been run on any of the versions of the affected operating systems had to be assumed to have its public key compromised. And the number of certs that had to be replaced was dramatic. We see advances in cryptography attacks all the time. And you never know when somebody's going to publish a paper and it's going to sort of blow open the world of cryptography, and we're going to say, oh, gee, we all can't use this anymore. This key length of RSA is no good anymore, right? We're all waiting for that paper to appear, and there are papers all the time that chisel away at RSA and ECC just a little bit. And those are advances, and somewhere along the lines, those mean that things we once deemed secure, we now must not deem secure anymore. And then this last one is going to come. It's going to affect all of us. Quantum computers. Jay, I think you did a whole session on this in this very summit. But what's the short story on that?
Short story for those of you who are curious is basically within the time frame of 2026 and probably not terribly far beyond. Quantum computers will have enough stable qubits. In other words, the capabilities of quantum computers will be sufficient to be able to factorize the RSA and ECC cryptographic algorithms, the most common algorithms we use today, in a reasonable amount of time. By reasonable, I mean by 2026, 2027, it could be down to a year, a month for a quantum computer, to be able to decrypt a certain amount of ECC or RSA encrypted data. And so therefore, the entire webinar that I gave was about what do we need to do as an industry in order to remain agile and have new cryptographic standards, quantum resistant cryptographic standards, in order to be able to move into the future in a quantum world.
Right. And so all of these things together create a situation where basically any given certificate that you have, any given certificate that you're operating, may at any time be not trustworthy anymore. And you may have to rapidly replace any single certificate or many of your certificates, or conceivably all of them. You might be able to have to do that in a certain very specific time frame. And so this is where we come to the concept of certificate agility. And the basic definition of certificate agility is exactly that. I need to assume that every certificate that I have is constantly under threat of requiring replacement. And if you take that to its extreme, total certificate agility would be the ability to replace any and all certificates in your environment at any time. And that's what we want to get to. That may be a holy grail that we never quite achieve, but we want to get as close to that as we can, and that's what we want to be aspiring for. And so what are the consequences of this if we think this through? What are the criteria? You need to be able to replace them, get the right cert, get it installed, deployed, running correctly. It all needs to be ARIDS-C free. Needs to be immediate. If your cert's got to be replaced, it's got to be replaced. I can't say I'm going to do it in a week or I'm going to do it in a month. It's got to be I'm going to do it in a minute. It needs to be precise down to the individual certificate, right? If there are 5 certificates that need replacement, you need to be able to identify the 5 and do the 5. If there's 500, you need to be able to identify the 500 and do the 500. But you don't need to want to be able to have to go through and wipe out whole categories and environments of certificates if most of them are just fine. At the same time, you need to be able to handle any volume, up to and including all of them. Again, there are incidents that I talked about in this list of incidents we talked about before that affected millions of certificates, literally. And it needs to be verifiable. I need to be able to know at the end of the day that I got the ones I needed to get. I need to be able to identify them, know that they're the ones that need to be replaced, get them replaced, and know that they're replaced. And if you can do all of those things, then you have achieved total certificate agility. And if you have not achieved total certificate agility, say that fast 10 times. If you have not achieved total certificate agility, then what you have achieved is risk, and increasing levels of risk all the time, because as we're seeing, certificates have to be changeable. I mean, this is a big thing, and this is how people get in trouble, is they don't have this level of agility, and people get in trouble this way all the time. So, what are the factors that enter into this? I talked about visibility, right? That's one of the big ones. You have to know what you have. Provisioning and installation, getting them onto your environment and where they need to be, very important. And then lack of built-in restrictions, right? So pinning, is definitely one of the challenges with this. It's an anti-agility move. If you require a certain certificate in a certain environment, you can't put a different certificate there, or it will break. Then that's a problem, right? Because you're lacking that agility. We're running into a real example of that right now because the CA browser forum is deprecating the organizational unit field, the OU field, for public certificates later this year for public SSL, and we're helping our clients get through this, and we're finding a surprisingly large number of people who have written software that is depending on the contents of an OU field being a certain thing, or like it won't work. And they're not going to have an OU field, so they have to go fix this. That's an example of pinning. That's a bad practice, right? Because it's a practice that hurts your agility and it gets you in trouble. Or another one is root store limits, right? People go and they take out the roots from the root store they're not using. And what that does is that hurts your flexibility. You can't go and change these things later. So these are all examples of factors that can either contribute to or fight your certificate agility. So how do we do that? What does a CLM solution look like that accomplishes our goals of achieving total certificate agility? Shall we get into it, Jay?
Let's do it, Tim. This is one of my favorite subjects.
Yes. I love this one. So I love this slide. So this is the four things: deploy, discover, revoke and replace, and renew. Those are the 4 pillars, and those pillars hold up a concept of visibility, which sits on top of them, a capstone that is enabled by those 4 pillars, but at the same time also holds those pillars up. So visibility creates structural strength back to those pillars, as those pillars also make it possible for visibility to be there and to work. And so those are the things to talk about. So with that, let's first of all, so some general considerations for any CLM, right? Few things that you're going to need to think about. One is you want breadth of certificate types. In another session, we talked about this concept of certificate agnosticism, right? Basically, it's what you need to do. Your CLM needs to be certificate agnostic. It needs to work for all types of certificates, public, private, different types, different authentication levels, different configurations, different physical environments, things along those lines. But another thing to consider is it's not just traditional certs, right? You need to be thinking about your CAs. You need to be thinking about your SSH keys. You need to make sure that all of those things are working together. And for all of these, we want what we want from any platform. We want it to be available, reliable, secure, compliant, updated, right? Things along those lines, right? You want patches to occur and all of that. So you need all of that stuff in place, or your CLM isn't going to be a winner, right? It's not going to be successful, and it's not going to need to get you ultimately where you need to go.
Tim, I think maybe just one extra point on this is,
sure,
in the past, when people are considering these things, it was almost mutually exclusive in terms of being able to deliver all of those things together. In other words, you needed to have multiple systems cobbled together, and most people never got past 1 or 2 systems. Perhaps a system for their public certs and one for one of their private cert use cases, and then they left it there because it just, the complexity started to multiply very quickly. And so therefore, Tim, I think this is part of what we're talking about, is bringing all of that together into one. That's just so important.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point, Jay. And you're going to see as we walk through these 4 pillars, they all touch each other and they all influence and affect each other. And you'll see that. And so these don't live in a vacuum. You wouldn't want to just go out and buy something that was only a renew package, right? You do need these things to work together and to interact. So the first of these, deployment. So what are we looking for with deployment? Our basic capability is we want to be able to order and issue a certificate. So I need to be able to go into my system, say I need a certificate, I need it here, it needs to be provisioned for me, and it needs to be deployed, ideally all the way down to sitting on the hardware and confirmed to be working correctly. And that's not true for every hardware and every environment, but we need to get as close to that as we possibly can. So we're very interested in ease of issuance. We're very interested in ease of obtaining a cert. And again, making sure that we can get the full range and selection of certs that we want and the configurations we want from the sources that we want. And then from an installation perspective, right, you need to have options. So some operating systems are going to support an API, like Acme. Some are not and are going to require an agent. And the more of those that you have, the more of those capabilities you have, the closer you get to being able to have this kind of seamless, automated, all the way to the last mile kind of deployment, which is very important.
Tim, I think point I'd like to make on this slide is some of you who are very technical might think of Acme, SCEP, and EST as agent-based, and you'd be right. On this slide, it's listed as API-based. What I'd like to talk about there is the API-based, say, REST calls, right? In other words, using web services in order to be able to make a call into basically a set of methods and operations. That is allowing you to have flexibility even to call individual certificates, small batches, or even large batches. So in other words, for those of you who come from the tradition of the public trust world, the Acme agent is something that is of great interest to you. For those of you who come from the private trust world, that ability to have the flexibility of using an API-based call to be able to get your certificates and deploy them where they need to go is incredibly powerful. It doesn't lock you in, though. Notice that what all of these agent-based protocols that are listed here have in common is that they are open protocols. Nothing that we're listing here is proprietary, and that's a really important approach that SIGTIGO has.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jay. So what are the benefits, right? So a big one is just accurate installation. The biggest one is accurate installation. I don't find out the hard way that my certificates were not installed or were not installed correctly, right? That's the biggest one by far, that it's consistent, it's compliant, it's predictable, you know what you're getting, and you know that that works. But another one that's very big is employee efficiency. So, we're in an environment with a vast IT skills gap, where every company in the world cannot staff its IT needs because there's just so much going on, and the amount we need is growing all the time. Things are getting more digital all the time, and the size of digital business is increasing faster than universities can crank out IT professionals. And so, as a consequence, we all have this problem where our much needed resources are in too much demand. So why on earth would you have them sitting and going through a manual certificate installation process when you could get an automated system to do the same thing for you? What that would do is that would let those very valuable employees do something more valuable for your company that only a human can do. So that improved efficiency is also hugely valuable here. And then the last one is, if you're installing your certificates, if you're deploying your certificates using your automated platform, that means they're in your automated platform. They're sitting in your CLM, which means they automatically get the benefit of all the other aspects of CLM that we're going to be talking about here, right? So this gets them right into the system, and they can get the benefits when we go downstream.
Tim, let me plug a bullet point that's not here, but that's security. For those of you who knew the early iterations of the SCEP protocol, for example, believe it or not, it was a username and password that were hard coded into the SCEP instruction set. And so therefore, the Black Hat Conference, there were white hat researchers who pointed out, hey, this is a terrible practice. And so now we have better alternatives such as EST, which actually, just like Acme, actually open up an encrypted and fully authenticated tunnel between where the certificate's being issued from and where it's going to. So in other words, a lot of thinking has been done about how to do this deployment, what I call issuance, securely.
Cool. I like that. Now, the second one, and kind of a partner to deployment, is discovery. So there are certificates that show up in your environment that you didn't put there. They come in through shadow IT, they come in through M&A, they come in through individual development teams making decisions that necessarily the infra team doesn't know about. They come in through just individuals making choices for themselves because they think they know what they're doing, and they fail to communicate. And all of these things cause you to have what we refer to as rogue certificates. These certificates that are in your system, nobody knows is there. They weren't put there by the team of people who's supposed to manage your certs. And too often we find about the rogue certificates the hard way when something happens and there's some kind of outage and systems are failing, and we run around trying to figure out why systems are failing and things aren't running and work isn't getting done. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it turns out, oh, well, this certificate that I didn't even know existed went and expired. And so this is where discovery comes in, right? The idea behind discovery is that you can search your network for the certificates that are used. You can find them, say, aha, these certificates are in production, and then you can bring them into your management system. So you bring them under management, you do all the things you need to do, you look at them and you understand when they're expiring, and you get warnings and flags and things along those lines. You also look at the parameters of what they are. And you can ask yourselves questions like, are they compliant? Are they consistent with the rules that I've set for my own PKI, or the rules that are enforced on me by SLAs, regulations, etc.? And do I know that these certificates are actually compliant, or can I identify the ones that aren't and I can swap them out for some that are? So those are the basic capabilities that you get with discovery, and I think that's the way that a decent number of certificates oftentimes move into the environment, is they find these rogue certs that are out there in the world before there's a problem, and we bring them in and we can manage them.
Tim, the only thing I might add is on your chart that looks like, of course, a Greek temple of the four pillars. Right. I would say that discovery, I would make the argument, if I were making the chart, I would actually put discovery at the far left, because even without deployment, one of the operations you could do alone before you do anything else with a PKI is actually to run discovery. It can actually be an independent function, sure, regardless of anything else you do. To me, discovery is utterly, fundamentally important, and that's why it is absolutely one of the top pillars.
And that is actually where some people start, right? I'm going to discover everything that's there, and that's how I'm going to get my basis, and then I'm going to start operating from there. Absolutely. So what are the benefits? We've kind of touched on these. So again, the first and foremost, prevent unexpected outages. What we don't want to do is we don't want to have these blow-ups, these things happen where suddenly systems aren't working and I don't know why. So this is the biggest one by far. Prevent unexpected outages. Let me say it one more time. Prevent unexpected outages, right? That's the biggest thing you get from discovery. But it's not the only thing, right? Part of it is it lets you plan. Now you can plan a little, right? I can look and I can say, these are the certificates I have, and this is when they come up for renewal, and this is how much I'm spending, and gee, I can consolidate these under a single vendor, and that way it'll be more expensive, more cost efficient, and et cetera, right? All that comes. And then we already alluded on this concept of governance, right? That I can start to say, well, what are my rules? What are the rules that I've set for my PKI, either for myself, or what are the rules that I have to live with because someone else has set them for me? And I can confirm and validate that I'm following those rules and I'm following them correctly. And I can report that up to my senior management, and I can report that to my customer or my regulating agency or my board member. And so all of that comes with discovery as well.
Tim, here's some homework I'd like to give to the audience. This is for everyone. This is a question you need to be able to answer right off the top of your sleeve, which is, how many DevOps Kubernetes clusters are you operating? That'll answer how many rogue CAs you have in your environment. The question then you have to answer is, do you have visibility to the certificates being issued by those certificate authorities underneath your Kubernetes clusters? And have you then, because you have got visibility to those, how many of you have actually formally put those into a PKI governance program? My suspicion is that most of you don't even know how many Kubernetes clusters you're running, and therefore that's
Right.
your first line of homework. This is so important, folks. Most of you have obsessed for years about your SSL and your authentication use cases. You probably don't realize you're running certificates in many other use cases and need discovery for all of them.
Yeah. And they're all going to expire. All certificates expire. So, so then once we have our certificates, either because we've created them ourselves, we knew what they were and we provisioned them, we obtained them and installed them, or we found certificates that were already out there in the world, confirmed they meet our requirements, and put them in our management platform so we know what they are and they have visibility and can manage them. Now what happens? These certificates are going to sit in our world, in our environment, and sometimes they need action. And what this really comes down to is revoke and replace, right? So sometimes these certificates need to be revoked, or sometimes they need to be replaced with new certificates. And so what are the capabilities here? You need to be able to know the certificates you want. You need to be able to locate the ones that meet the criteria of what needs to be revoked, and you need to be able to actually revoke them. You also need to be able to obtain replacements. You need to be able to do this with whatever fine level of granularity is required, down to the individual cert, or you need to do them in mass in any volume required. And this could be based on certain criteria. You could say, show me everything that's using this hashing algorithm. Okay, replace them all, right? When you are replacing the certs, then obviously it comes back to what we said before. You need to be able to obtain them, and you need to be able to install them, or get as close as you possibly can. And then when that's the case, they need to be under management. You need to see when those certificates are going to expire, and the whole lifecycle management needs to be there. That's the capabilities we're looking for with revoke and replace. And what are the benefits of that? The first one is just that your revocation goes on correctly, right? If you have agile, accurate revocation of your certificates, you know you can revoke what you need when you need. You get rid of those security problems or those compliance problems or those things that are forcing your revocation, and that allows you to defend against compliance failure, breaches, outages, things along those lines. And then when your replacement certificates come, you know that you're going to get those installed correctly, right? You'll get those installed, you get them in place. And once again, what does all of this lead to? It leads to more efficient use of your employee time. You're not sitting there manually going through and replacing 53 certificates. You hit a button and it's done. You're confident it's done correctly, and you can move on to other things. Lastly, renewal. So all certificates expire. I think I said that earlier. All certificates expire. And so the capabilities of renewals, we need to be able to detect and track the certificates that are coming up on expiration. So I need to look at them. I know what they are. And I need to say, aha, these are the certificates that are coming up for expiration. This is when they're coming. I want to replace these. I don't want to replace those because I've sunsetted that function. Let those die. Don't waste my money or my computing bandwidth on those. These certificates need to be renewed. This is what I want to renew them with. Have that renewal automatically occur. The new one's installed. They're installed correctly. We confirm that they're installed correctly. And like I said, I can elect for non-renewal. That is what the renewal capabilities need to look like in this kind of environment. And so what are the benefits? We talked about this, right? This is the big one, is prevent those unexpected outages. Let me say it again. Prevent those unexpected outages. Prevent those unexpected outages. Those things are so damaging, so expensive. You have SLA failures. You have loss of reputation. You have failure to do business. You have customer SAP problems. You have employee SAP problems. You have SLA violations. You have regulatory violations. All of that stuff. You can have security problems. All those things can be the direct consequence of failing to renew your certificates correctly. That is, if there was a pie chart of the value, then that would be almost all of the pie chart, and then there'd be a tiny sliver that would be the other things. But the other things are still valuable. Save your employee time. Save your employee time. Have this done automatically. Don't have your valuable employees sitting and plugging away at this work that could be done by a computer. And then the last one is it's a great way to remain current, right? So we haven't talked at all on this particular talk about crypto agility, but crypto agility is very important. The idea that cryptography is not a static thing. It's a moving target. And I need to make sure that I am staying current on the correct cryptographic practices that are not going to be defeated by today's computers and today's techniques. And when you renew automatically in this kind of system, you can ensure that the certificates that you're renewing with are following the practices that are considered to be current and correct. And that can be built right into your platform, so you don't have any question of, well, geez, do I know that none of my certs have old hashing algorithms? Do I know that none of my certs have key lengths that are too low? Yes, I do know that, because all of that was done automatically, and it was done automatically according to the governance rules that I laid out. Do you want to add to that, Jay?
Tim, I want to highlight a little bit more about the saving of employee time, just to go through it, even for people who are business oriented and not technical. A lot of you might just leave this to your Linux administration team and say, hey, go for it, right? Just renew the cert. Keep in mind, we did a study about it. Really, does it make a difference? Is it a time-consuming event? And in fact, it is. The number of things that actually have to happen with a renewal involve, remotely logging into a web server, which inherently has its own risks. The ability then for the Linux administrator to then basically obtain the certificate manually, the ability then to modify the Apache or the Nginx or whatever web server you're using, the configuration files, and then, of course, placing that certificate in the correct place in a secure manner. If you multiply that by every web property you have, you multiply that by every load balancer you have. Back in the old days, Tim, when you had just one web server, we're talking about half an hour of work to an hour. Multiply that by the number of web properties that you now have, and you're now dealing with, multiply those number of hours by the number of dollars per hour you're paying that Linux administrator. And we're talking about real actual money here every year, right? So therefore, Tim, the benefits are tangible.
If it's even that simple, because the real problem is it can't be solved with money, right? That everybody has tons and tons of open recs because I can't find the people that I want to hire to trust to do this stuff. And by the way, one of the reasons I can't find the people that I want to have the hire is because I have open jobs, and I have open jobs because the people I had are leaving because they're going to places where they can do more interesting or challenging things. So if you're worried about employee productivity, you need to be worried about the skills gap. And the skills gap comes down to, there's two things that affects here. One is take the people that you do have and get the most out of them. And the other one is take the people that you do have and keep them around. And you keep them around by giving them challenging, meaningful, important work that expands their skills and abilities and makes them going home feeling like they did something good at the end of the day, instead of numbs their mind clicking on buttons all day.
Believe me, if you have an employee who has an Excel spreadsheet of certificates and at intervals has to set an alarm clock to basically remind themselves, oh, I've got to go off and do this same function over and over and over again, that employee, believe me, wants to move on from your organization.
Right. That's the worry. That's exactly the worry. So all right, so then all of these four pillars are propping up this concept of visibility, and then visibility, of course, enables them as well. So what do we mean by visibility? The capabilities here, we need to be able to view all of the certificates that we have, right? We need to look at all the supports we have, know what they are, and know the qualities of them. So things like their key sizes, their hashing algorithms, the time to expiration, the CA they came from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of this stuff needs to be easily available to me so I can look and know these things about all the certificates I have. And I need to be able to flag certificates that for whatever reason, that are non-compliant with my parameters that I've set down, or are coming up expiration, or things along those lines. I need to be easily find and identify those certificates. And then, of course, what form should this take? Should take all the forms we normally would expect. I should be able to run a report and see a dashboard and get an alert when certain conditions occur. And I should be able to do individual searches for specific things and find the results of those things. And this is all the capabilities that you have to have in order to have visibility on your certificates.
Just to add very quickly, repeating what we've said, you cannot have governance without visibility. And this comes back to the homework that I keep reminding you about. You might think, oh yeah, I've already got a governance program for my SSL. I've already got my governance program for some of my,
Yeah.
whatever certificates I'm using for authentication. I guarantee you don't yet for DevOps, and I guarantee you don't yet for your IoT. And I
Yep.
bet you there are at least a handful of other use cases you're about to do that you're
Yep.
not going to have full visibility to. Think about it.
Right. Besides, again, shadow IT. What about all of those other people who don't roll up to you and what are they out there doing? Right. And you need visibility on that. So what are the benefits? Well, the first one is in that big green box, I would say. You need to be able to discover and rectify potential problems before they become actual problems. Right. So I need to be able to see, okay, I'm okay. Right. I know I'm okay, or oh, I'm not okay here. Oops. Let's go get okay. Right. And get that solved before there's a problem. And the biggest one of those potential problems is expiration, but there are others. Right. It's not the only one. But it has other benefits as well. It lets you plan your certificate usage. Right. If you know what you're using, you know what you have, you know what you're spending, you know how to make it optimized. You know how to budget for it. You know how to budget your time for it. You know how to evaluate risk scenarios, right? Those are all things that come from visibility. And you can demonstrate this, right? You can make your stakeholders know this. I can go to the board. I can go to the senior management team. I can go to outsiders. I can go to key customers. I can go to regulators and say, look, I am secure. I can demonstrate that I'm secure. Here's how I can show you that. Here's a report. Tell me everything you have. Do you have anything that isn't using SHA-1? Well, I can show you that I don't, because I know everything I am using, because I did discovery and I ran a report, and look, there's 0 things with SHA-1, right? And then the last one is peace of mind. This is a huge one. So I remember a year and a half ago, I was talking to a large enterprise client. I was trying to understand like what they got out of their CLM deployment. And what someone said to me essentially was said, every morning I would wake up and the first thing I would do is look at email. And I was dreading that message that said the following thing isn't working. There's an expired certificate caused us to have the following outage. And I knew that my day was going to be terrible whenever that happened. And every day that it didn't happen, I breathed a sigh of relief and went and got my coffee, right? But every day that it did, I was going to have a really lousy day. And now I don't do that anymore because I know what I have. And I know I'm not going to get that email. And when I go to bed at night, I'm confident that I'm going to wake up in the morning and I'm not going to have a crisis. And that's great. That's important. Resting easy and having peace of mind for yourself and your employees and your chain of command above you and your other key stakeholders. That's very valuable stuff. And it's not to be underestimated. And that's one of the benefits that you get with visibility as well.
Any and all cybersecurity standards that you are holding yourself to, any one of them that's worth its salt, will say the fundamental thing you have to get down first before you do any fancy cybersecurity is take inventory. What is it you have? And what Tim just went through is the PKI version of that kind of thinking to get yourself set up as a basic standard for cybersecurity involving your digital identities, period.
Period. Love it. So that's the 4 pillars of CLM: deployment, discovery, revoking and replacement, and renewal. All of that with a penumbra, a capstone of visibility. If you did like this talk, Jason and I do have a podcast. We call it Root Causes, which is a pun, a PKI and security podcast. You can find it where you listen to your podcasts. Please subscribe to us. Give us a listen. We go deep into lots of topics involving cryptography, digital certificates, digital identity, PKI, and related matters. And you can browse through and find the things you want, or just take our next episode as it comes to you. We'd love to have you join us very much. And please come join us on our podcast.